A good rule of thumb when it comes to any story is that you need to remember that your story can only be as good as you can tell it. The way that you present the events, the struggles, the strives, the conflicts, and the growth of your character will only be as interesting as the way they're able to present it through the eyes of all of your other characters, and no perspective may be as important as the eyes of your villain that you'll create in your story. The villain, roadblock, or the adversary in your story will provide the inciting incident that will yank your character out of that comfortable life that they live at the moment and will put them on the trek, journey, or the trial that they need to endure in order to become the character that we all know that they can be. The villain is what sets that off. The villain is what sets off the events of the entire story. The villains are there for the main characters at their weakest moments. The villains are there for the main characters at their best moments. In a way, you could say that villains even raise the heroes that they face, because the villains are able to witness every single event that keeps our hero progressing forward to the person that we want them to be at the end of any book, TV show, or movie. That's why it's so disappointing to see so many characters like Voldemort, Darth Vader, or the Joker transform into such lackluster villains such as Jared Leto's version of the Joker in Suicide Squad, Kylo Ren or Snoke or Palpatine or whoever you want to reference in the new Star Wars trilogy, or Grindelwald in the Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them series. Even the most accomplished of storytellers seem to be running out of villains to put into their most iconic stories. Franchises such as Batman, Star Trek, and Star Wars seem to be rehashing the same villains over and over and over in order to get all of the dollars they can squeeze out of all of the fanboys of their franchises. Others, like James Bond, Transformers, and every single trashy horror movie since the year 2000, seem to be dead set on wearing out every single cliche, trope, and awful plot twist that you've already forgotten about. Storytellers today seem dead set on ignoring or forgetting every single aspect that makes a villain so great, memorable, and iconic. So sit back, relax, and if you want, take some notes while I explain what it is that makes a villain memorable, what you can do now to create a good villain, and what you need to avoid in order to make a cliche villain like Jared Leto's Joker. First, let's talk about what a villain is and is not, what qualifies as an evil genius, and what qualifies as an irritating nuisance. Now, there are 3 rules I personally hold to that help me determine what is simply a villain and what is simply an annoyance throughout the story. Rule number 1. The villain must be in between the hero and the goal they're trying to accomplish. If they can get past the villain without having to fight, deal with, overcome, or they can simply even evade the villain, then he's not a villain. A villain stands in opposition, whether direct or indirect, to the hero's main progress in the story, and the only way that the hero can progress is if they overcome this person, group, or obstacle in their quest for becoming the hero they were meant to be. Rule number 2. The villain must test the hero in at least 2 ways, whether it's physically and emotionally, mentally or psychologically, or spiritually and physically. Any of those combinations will work, but simply being tested physically is not a villain. Lifting weights is a test physically. Those aren't villains. Villains test us in a multitude of ways and make us evolve as people in order to become who we're supposed to be. So little things like climbing a mountain, that's not a villain. It needs to test you in multiple facets. Rule number 3. A villain must be explainable. This doesn't mean that you have to explain everything about them on screen, or that we even have to have all the answers. But your villain has to be explainable. There has to be a reason why it is that they're doing what they're doing. If there isn't a reason, or the reason isn't very strong, you need to go back to the drawing board. Now consider this question with me for a moment. Can an object or a concept be the villain instead of having an individual be the villain? The answer is a resounding yes. Consider with me for a moment Castaway, starring Tom Hanks. In the movie, an individual gets on the plane, and while he's flying to his destination, his plane goes down. He's the only survivor, and he as a survivor is forced to survive on an island for a couple years, waiting for someone to rescue him and trying to figure out a way to get back home. Now when you think about it, the movie doesn't seem to have a villain, does it? The plane doesn't go down because someone sabotaged it and there's no one else on the island with him, so who could the villain be? A lot of people would answer that the villain would be the island in that case. And while it's a decent guess, the answer is wrong. Think about it very hard for a moment. Who stands between Tom Hanks and his sweetheart? Who stands between him and civilization? Who stands between him and the life that he used to lead? Now here's the answer. The real enemy and villain in the movie Castaway is the distance. The distance between him and his old life. The distance between him and his sweetheart. The difference between him and civilization. The distance in that movie is the villain because it stands between him and all the other things that he wants in life. It stands between him and what he's lost. The distance is obviously explainable since we watch it happen in the movie, and the distance itself is measurable, and it also tests him in multiple ways. You see, in that movie, Tom Hanks doesn't just change physically. He doesn't just get skinnier and grow a longer beard. Tom Hanks changes emotionally. You watch him try to kill himself at least twice in the movie, and you watch him evolve into this person, the savage, who's doing everything they can to take it day by day, trying to survive in this world that is unforgiving. That really is such a complex villain, and they've done it using only a concept of distance in order to tell that story. That's the reason why Castaway is one of the best movies I've ever seen about a person being stranded, because there's not even a villain in the story that you can see. The villain is just simply the concept of distance. However, simply knowing the difference between a nuisance and a villain doesn't make the villain memorable or iconic. In order to make a villain that everybody will truly remember, one needs to understand the why behind the villain. Specifically, why the villain is the way that they are, and why it is that they stand in direct opposition to the main character. Understanding and articulating the why behind your villain will do more for you than any amount of fancy words, world building, or any crazy plot twist could ever do for your story. For example, there's a common misconception, specifically among Batman fanboys, that the reason that the Joker is such a good character is because he's insane. The fact that he's off his rocker must mean that, due to his wild card nature, he's a really memorable character because he does random things at all points, and he's a wild card. He's something that you can't really predict. Therefore, this makes him a good villain. This is not true, and it never has been. The interesting thing about the Joker isn't that he's insane. The interesting thing about the Joker is why and how he became insane. I don't have a lot of time to go really in depth into it in this video, but really quickly, let's look at the last 3 iterations of the Joker that they've done in the DC universe. Those of you who've watched my 5 things to remember when starting a story video, which I'll link right here, have a little bit of a head start on this. Specifically, let's first dive into the Heath Ledger version of the Joker. The Dark Knight's version of the Joker, played by Heath Ledger, is probably the most universally beloved version of the Joker, at least in the past 30 or so years. The reason for this, in my humble opinion, is because Heath Ledger's character arc is so simple, yet so many layers deep. Heath Ledger's entire story is simply this. It's a story of a man who is so unhappy and so lonely that he will go to whatever depths he can and make his enemy suffer as much as possible in order for that person to truly understand him so that he won't be alone anymore. That's the entire motivation of the Joker. And this has always been indicated in the movie. If you listen closely, you'll hear a line in the interrogation scene between Batman and Joker that confirms all this for you very simply.
Never start with the head. The victim gets all fuzzy. He can't feel the neck. See?
You wanted me. Here I am.
I wanted to see what you'd do. And you didn't disappoint. You let 5 people die. Then you let Dent take your place. Even to a guy like me, that's cold.
Where's Dent?
Those mob fools want you gone so they can get back to the way things were. But I know the truth. There's no going back. You've changed things. Forever.
And why do you want to kill me?
I don't want to kill you. What would I do without you? Go back to ripping off mob dealers? No, you complete me.
The interesting thing about this version of the Joker is that even though you don't know a whole lot about him from the movie, and the movie is very skimpy on details of how he came to be, the way that those details are presented and the way that that villain is laid out for you, he feels familiar to you. And you're very familiar, even if it's subconsciously, you're very familiar with his goal and his message. The Joaquin Phoenix version of the Joker was mired by controversy that was honestly mostly unnecessary. It was a lot of hysteria created by a lot of media that were trying to make the movie bigger than it was. And for all the hysteria about the motion picture, it should be noted that the actual message of the film is opaque. It's very open and it's set very plainly in view for the viewer. The entire film's message revolves around the consequences of a society that cares more about the collective than it does about the individual, about maintaining the status quo than it does about actually improving the lives of people who need help. Batman is not in the movie at all. The villain is not actually defined by Batman. The villain is defined by his own story, which is the reason that the Joker, regardless of what people will say to you in the critical media, The movie is centered around Joker, it knows its audience, and it presents its message extremely clearly and extremely well. Now, as many of you probably know, Jared Leto's iteration of the Joker is universally hated by a lot of DC fans, and there's a very good reason for this. Jared Leto's Joker is not a character. He's a celebration. He's fan service. He's nostalgia, served up on a plate to the fanboys, begging them to buy movie tickets and to buy Joker-themed memorabilia. Anybody with 2 pairs of working eyes could see as soon as they released the Suicide Squad trailer that this was not going to be a good movie. That this was 100% just going to be a highlight reel of special effects and really shallow dialogue, all meant to present the Joker as the main event of the film. It was clear from the beginning that DC had no intention of doing anything about the Joker right in this film, and that this was simply supposed to be a celebration of a character, and so rightly, the fans decided to hate it. Listen, I'm not the biggest DC guy, I don't know the Joker lore super well, but what I do know about storytelling and what I do know about creating villains lets me understand that this version of the Joker, it's awful. It's a terrible attempt by DC to just simply sell tickets based on nostalgia. The problem is, once the creators of a franchise find a villain that sticks really well with fans, someone that they really receive and they accept as lore in that story, they tend to milk the cash cow. Movie studios and book publishers know that the fanboys and fangirls of that series, book, movie, TV show, doesn't matter, they're going to come back for more, praying and hoping that this version of their favorite villain will be somewhat comparable to the last, even half as good as the original. And every single time, they come away disappointed, wishing that they hadn't spent their money on that ticket, wishing that they hadn't bought that memorabilia cut from the movie theater, wishing that they hadn't wasted the 3 hours of their life, or the 12 hours of their life, or depending on if it's a Netflix show or not, 12 million hours of their life, watching a show that contains a villain that's straight up pointless. It's the reason why The Rise of Skywalker made $1 billion, even though it was objectively hot garbage. It's the reason why Transformers will do the same. And it's the reason why they will continue to make Batman movies until Kingdom Come. Because they know that the fans and the critics will keep coming every single time, praying that they decided this time not to serve them hot garbage. They know that we, the fans, the audience, will keep coming back over and over and over, knowing that even though it's not Voldemort, and even though it's just some repackaged dark wizard named Grindelwald that's obviously going to be garbage, that somehow that character, that villain, will fill that void that's left by the villain that we knew so well. Now there's some brain food that you can chew on for a little bit. If you like the video, please give it a like, and if you want to see more content, please subscribe. I post twice a week, and I really would love to hear in the comments down below what you agreed with, what you disagreed with, and what your take on villains is. Please feel free to help everybody out in the comments. And as always, I'm Jackson, and I'll talk to you later.